So you have a Kubernetes application that you want to deliver to your customers' environments. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Those customers can have vastly different environments. Not everyone has Kubernetes or the expertise to operate it effectively. They can have different operating systems and versions with various types of security hardening in place. There are different network topologies, proxy servers, and so many more variables that you need to account for, ideally before a customer tries to install and then raises an issue. In addition, your customers bought your application for the business value it provides, but requiring customers to operate complex infrastructure like Kubernetes distracts them from using the software they paid for and increases the likelihood of friction, failure, and frustration. Today, I'll introduce you to Embedded Cluster, a tool from Replicated that lets your customers install your Kubernetes application on basically any Linux machine they provide. Embedded Cluster essentially makes Kubernetes a dependency of your application, so that when customers install, upgrade, and manage your application, Kubernetes is transparently installed, upgraded, and managed too. Your customers don't even need to know that Kubernetes is involved. As far as they know, they're just interacting with your application. They're guided through the installation and other common workflows, and an intuitive admin console lets them do things like deploy, update, and backup your application with a few simple clicks. Embedded Cluster accounts for all the customer environment situations that we mentioned before, running comprehensive pre-flight checks to ensure that the installation will succeed in the customer's environment. So let's see how this works. After you've onboarded to the Replicated platform, your customers can run a few simple commands to install the application. So here I am in the customer download portal. You can give your customers a password to access this download portal, and then they get access to the install commands that they need to get up and running with your application. So I'm going to head over to this virtual machine and run the first command. This is a curl command that's going to download a tarball that's going to include two things. One, a license for me, the customer, and two, a binary that I as the customer can use to install and manage the application. So once that's done, we can get the second command, which will untar this and extract these assets that we need. So first is the tarball, is the installer, the binary. My application is called Gitty Mastodon in this case, so that's what my binary is called. If your application is called my application, then this is going to be called my application. And then I also have the license here. And then the third thing that I need to do is actually run the install command. So the first thing that's going to ask for is a password. This is the customer setting the password that they're going to use to access the admin console. So they set that password. And then the first thing that we're going to do here is run host preflights. This is going to ensure that this environment is ready and able to support the installation of my application. So it's going to check the amount of CPU and memory. It'll check if it's an online installation. It'll check for connectivity to the needed HTTP endpoints, storage space, things like that to make sure that all of the requirements and prerequisites are present in this environment. So now it's going to move into the installation. This takes about 5 minutes, give or take, to install the Kubernetes cluster, the admin console, and all of those needed infrastructure components. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this, and we'll resume in just a couple minutes when the installation here completes. All right, we can see here that the installation has finished, and at the end it says visit the admin console to configure and install my application. So I'm going to click on this link. That takes me to the Gitty admin console, so the admin console for my application. And I can see here a landing page. It just shows me how we're going to get started. We're going to start by securing the admin console, going to configure the Kubernetes cluster if desired, configure Gitty, my application, and then finally validate the environment and deploy. So let's go ahead and get started. We start with just a little warning here that says that right now the admin console is secured by a self-signed TLS certificate. The browser is going to give us a warning about that because it's self-signed. We don't have to worry about that. It's secure. And in the next step, we have the opportunity to replace that with our own certificate if we want to. So I'm going to proceed through that browser warning. And in my case, I'm going to choose to continue with the self-signed certificate. You can upload your own certificate if you want to, but for this demo, I will continue with self-signed. So now that that is all in place, we're happy with the TLS security for the browser and the admin console. I can go ahead and enter my password to log in. So now I have the opportunity to log in to configure the cluster. So in this case, I have different roles that I can assign to each node. So embedded cluster supports not only single node, but multi-node clusters. So if your application is beefy and requires a lot of different machines, or maybe if you want to have if you have a database, like in my example here, that you want to run on its own dedicated infrastructure and keep the rest of the application separate, then you could have a database role. So for example, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this command, and I'm going to bring this over to a second virtual machine that I have, where I've already gone ahead and downloaded my binary that I can use. And then I'm just going to run this join command. And so this join command is going to do host preflights as well to make sure that this node is in good shape to join the cluster. And then it's going to join it, and it's going to have the database role. So behind the scenes, as the software vendor, I've configured these roles so that when my application deploys, my database is going to deploy on this node. So this is just a good example of how embedded cluster supports multi-node clusters and a lot of different deployment options and configurations that you might need as a software vendor. So while this second node is deploying and joining the cluster, I'll just mention that embedded cluster deploys a conformant production-grade Kubernetes cluster. So even though the speed and ease of embedded cluster really lends itself to sales demos and POCs and things, and even development, it's really purpose-built for running your application in a customer's production environment. So let's head back to the admin console, and we can see now that both of my nodes are ready. I have a primary, I have a database node, both of them are ready, so let's continue. So now I get to the part where I can configure my application. So for me, my application all centers around the database that Gitti is going to use. First question is, do I want to use a dedicated Postgres node? I just deployed that, so yeah, I do want to do that. So let's go ahead and check that box. I also can set my Postgres username, password, and database. I'm going to leave these as the defaults and click continue here. Then we're going to run pre-flight checks again. These are application pre-flight checks, so make sure the cluster and the environment is ready for the application. All of that looks good. And then I'm going to go ahead and click deploy to deploy the application. So we can see here that the version 0.1.157 of my application has successfully deployed. I can look in here and see the different resources of my application that are important to me. So I have a deployment for Gitti that is still unavailable. So behind the scenes, this is all spinning up. In just a few minutes or even seconds, we should see that become ready. And then at that point in time, our application is ready, and we'll be able to click on this link here to open the application and start using it. So I'm going to pause real quick while that deploys, and we'll resume in just a minute. All right, so now we can see that my deployment is all ready. I'm going to go ahead and open the application, and now I can see that Gitti is up and running. I could register for it if I wanted to. Now as the customer, I'm ready to go ahead and start using embedded cluster. So hopefully this gives you a good picture of how easy it can be for your customers to install and manage an application using embedded cluster with Replicated. So start a free trial or request a demo of embedded cluster to try it out for yourself.